Welcome to this episode with your host, Walter Sanderson, with the brief on grief. On last episode, which was part one, we dealt with that challenging emotion that hinders and makes our grief challenging. We spoke about guilt. We talked about how false guilt and true guilt are different, but how they both impact our healing process. And if you happen to miss that episode, please take time and go to my YouTube channel, check it out on Spotify and iHeart. Today, I want to deal with part two and that second emotion, which is forgiveness. I want to share a quote that I seen from author Gloria Jean Watkins. And she said that forgiveness and compassion are always linked. And how do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed? Wow. Forgiveness is something that is a powerful thing when it comes to our healing and the process of grief. Forgiveness, if I'm not careful, will make us live in the past. When you are unable to extend it to somebody, it will make you live in your past and not live in your future and your life going forward. Forgiveness plays a major role with grief because there are people whose loved ones didn't pass away, but there is somebody that they know and believe are responsible for the untimely death of the loved one that they're grieving. Think about the people whose loved ones have lost their lives to drive-by shootings. Think about the loved ones who have lost their lives in a hit and run, drunk driver situations, mass shootings, unexplained deaths at the hands of law enforcement, and one of the big ones in our history, 9/11, and other tragedies that many of us know that our loved ones have died or as a result of have passed away. I need us to know we struggle with forgiveness in those situations. Think about the person whose child was killed by a drunk driver and the drunk driver walked away from the accident with a scratch not on their body. And the injured person is the one who had to have a funeral for their baby, a funeral for their loved one, a funeral for their friend. And the problem with giving forgiveness in these situations is at times it's hard for us to extend forgiveness because we don't believe like the party responsible reaped what they have done. And I know a lot of us, you've heard people talk to you at times about what you need to let go. But think about it. Who are we to ask someone to forgive people in these situations? I believe that it is only through people's faith, through their support of family and therapy, that they are able to begin the process to forgive, to help them grieve in a healthy way. When we talked about on our last episode of profound grief and how these two emotions affect that, it's because when your grief is impacted by unforgiveness, the sadness that you have dealing with the passing of a loved one, that sadness lies between anger that you feel, and it's difficult for you to get to the core of forgiveness, let alone to start to grieve. But I want to share with you on this episode of how it looks when it gets in the way of your healing. I need you to know that when you think about going to the doctor and you think about having a wound and think about going to the emergency room and them stitch up your wound, and yet they didn't clean out the infection. That's what it looks like when we're trying to grieve and we haven't forgiven somebody, when we're trying to grieve and we haven't really dealt with the guilt in our lives. It's like having a wound, but the infection is still present. And in an emotional way, not physically, but in an emotional way, that wound is closed by anger. And that's why a lot of us struggle with resentment. A lot of us struggle with bitterness and at times the need for revenge. It is hard to grieve in a healthy way when this happens with unforgiveness and especially guilt, because there is no room for happiness There is no room for joy, and you do not have peace of any kind. And I'm here to tell somebody, I'm talking about when somebody has done something to one of us or one of our loved ones. But one of the greatest struggles with forgiveness is when I have to forgive myself. I can't tell you the countless people I give counsel to and I speak with on a regular basis that are struggling with forgiving themselves for something that has happened. I just want to say this to you, as I would to any one of my clients sitting across from me. You have got to learn how to forgive you. Because when you learn to forgive you, it is then that you can begin to grieve in a healthy way. Somebody is saying, well, Walter, what does healthy grieving look like? Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because grieving in a healthy manner is simply when I discover that this interruption to my past life, this interruption to my present life can also be preparation for my life going forward. Grief impacts us all emotionally, it impacts us physically, and it impacts us spiritually, and it actually impacts how we behave based on those three areas. That's why you just can't tell people to go to church at times for 2 hours on one day to get through the process, because they're dealing with it on various layers. I'm here to tell anybody that is grieving, we all need a strong support system. And so I just want to share a few things with you that I believe will help us deal with our guilt, help us deal with unforgiveness, and most importantly, help us heal in a healthy way. Number one, you must have the freedom and the space to cry. You must have the room and the freedom to cry. Many of us, our grieving process, those myths of you can't cry, you've got to be strong, is what hinders us, especially dealing with guilt and unforgiveness. You have got to have the space and the freedom to cry. Number two, we've all got to schedule socialization. While I'm crying and going through the process of mourning, the physical way that I'm dealing with my inner grief, it is advised that we need to find support groups that we can sit in and share and socialize with people on a regular basis. I cannot tell you, when you're dealing with unforgiveness and guilt, that one of the ways it is healthy for you to process is the ability to speak with other people. Number three, if that's the case, then we've also got to find a trusting companion, trusting person, or people that we know will accept us where we are. And my guilt, my unforgiveness, my anger, whatever it may be, that profound grief that we struggle with, we've got to find people that will accept us where we are. People that I can be transparent with, and I can share my struggles honestly without any judgment. And finally, in order to get through my profound grief, in order to deal with my guilt, in order to deal with that word forgiveness, I've got to let go of bitterness. And I'm here to tell you that it can be done through prayer, but most importantly, through effective therapy. You've got to find yourself a grief counselor, find yourself a peer group, find yourself a support system where you can be honest and transparent. I want to say thank you for tuning in to part 2 and us dealing with the emotion of forgiveness. Thank you for tuning in to the brief on grief. And remember this, as I always say, we all know someone that is grieving something or someone, and that person may be you. If this information was helpful, please share it with somebody. Please take a moment to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Take a moment to subscribe and listen to my podcast on Spotify and iHeart. And I will see you all next time on the Brief on Grief.